The gunshot echoed through the saloon, and Yates Vance didn't flinch as the bullet embedded itself in the wooden post inches from his head. He simply took another sip of his whiskey, his steel-gray eyes never leaving the card table in front of him, and the three men who had been foolish enough to accuse him of cheating watched as he stood slowly, his hand hovering near his revolver. The tension broke when the sheriff burst through the swinging doors, and Yates walked out into the dusty streets of Dodge City, Kansas, leaving his winnings on the table because he had learned long ago that nothing was worth keeping, nothing was worth fighting for, and no one was worth trusting. It was the spring of 1878, and Dodge City hummed with the restless energy of cattle drives and desperate men seeking fortune. Yates had drifted into town 3 weeks prior, taking odd jobs at the stockyards and sleeping in the stable behind the general store because he refused the boarding house owner's offer of a proper room. He paid for the stable, insisted on it, but the idea of someone doing him a kindness, of someone caring whether he had a roof over his head or a warm meal, sat in his stomach like spoiled meat. The woman who ran the general store had noticed him, though Yates pretended not to see her watching. Clara Zimmerman had inherited the business from her father 6 months ago when fever took him, and at 22 years old, she ran it with the kind of fierce determination that made grown men step aside when she walked down the boardwalk with purpose in her stride. She had honey-colored hair that she kept pinned up under a practical bonnet, and eyes the color of amber that seemed to see straight through the walls people built around themselves. That afternoon, as Yates led his horse toward the stable, he found Clara waiting by the back door of her store, a bundle wrapped in cloth tucked under her arm. He was 24, lean and weathered beyond his years, with dark hair that fell past his collar and a scar that cut through his left eyebrow, a souvenir from a life he never discussed. "You look hungry," Clara said, her voice carrying the soft cadence of someone who had grown up in Missouri before moving west. "I am not," Yates replied, not breaking his stride. "Everyone gets hungry, Mr. Vance. It is a simple fact of being human." He paused then, his hand on his horse's reins, and turned to look at her properly for the first time. "I appreciate the thought, Miss Zimmerman, but I do not need charity. It is not charity. It is leftover cornbread and ham that will go to waste if someone does not eat it. You would actually be doing me a favor by taking it off my hands." Yates studied her face, searching for pity or condescension, but found only a straightforward honesty that unnerved him. "I said no, thank you." Clara did not move. "Why are you so determined to make everything harder than it needs to be? Why are you so determined to involve yourself in the business of a stranger?" he countered, his voice rougher than he intended. "Because I have watched you sleep in that stable for 3 weeks when there are perfectly good rooms available. Because you work yourself half to death at the stockyards and spend your evenings alone, speaking to no one. Because something in this world hurt you badly enough that you have forgotten how to accept even the smallest gesture of human decency, and that strikes me as a terrible waste of a life." The words hit Yates like a physical blow, and for a moment he could not breathe. No one had spoken to him like that in years. No one had looked past the careful distance he maintained, and the exposure felt dangerous. "You do not know anything about me. I know enough to see that you are slowly starving yourself of more than just food." Clara took 3 steps forward and held out the bundle. "Take it. Eat it. You do not have to talk to me or thank me or do anything except acknowledge that sometimes people offer kindness not because they want something in return, but because it is the right thing to do." Yates stared at the offering, his jaw tight, every instinct screaming at him to refuse, to walk away, to maintain the isolation that had kept him safe. But something in Clara's amber eyes held him there, something that suggested she would stand in that dusty yard until sunset if necessary, and against his better judgment, he reached out and took the bundle. "Thank you," he said quietly, the words rusty from disuse. Clara's face softened into a genuine smile. "You are welcome. And Mr. Vance, there is always more where that came from if you find yourself hungry again." She turned and walked back into her store before he could respond, leaving Yates standing there with his horse and a warm bundle of food and a strange tightness in his chest that he could not name. Over the following days, Yates tried to avoid Clara, but Dodge City was not large enough for successful evasion, especially when the object of avoidance seemed determined to intersect with his path at every opportunity. She appeared at the stockyards with water for the workers during the hottest part of the afternoon. She happened to be closing her store just as he finished his shift. She asked his opinion on which type of grain the horses preferred, though he suspected she knew the answer better than he did. Each interaction was brief, casual, and completely intentional, and Yates found himself simultaneously irritated and inexplicably drawn to this woman, who refused to respect the boundaries he had constructed so carefully. "You are persistent," he told her one evening as they both stood outside the stable, the Kansas sky turning purple and gold above them. "I prefer to think of it as dedicated," Clara replied, leaning against the fence rail. "My father used to say that the things worth having are the things worth working for." "And what exactly are you working for, Miss Zimmerman?" She turned to look at him, her expression serious. "I am working to remind you that not everyone in this world is out to harm you. That trust is not a weakness. That accepting help does not make you lesser or indebted or vulnerable in the ways you fear." Yates felt his throat constrict. "You presume a great deal about my fears. Then tell me I am wrong. Tell me you do not wake up every morning determined to need nothing from anyone. Tell me you would not rather break your back doing everything alone than risk letting someone in close enough to matter." He could not tell her she was wrong because every word was true, and the accuracy of her observation stripped away another layer of his carefully maintained armor. "What happened to make you this way?" Clara asked softly. "Who hurt you so badly that kindness feels like a threat?" Yates looked away across the darkening plains. "I had a family once, a ranch up in Montana Territory, a wife and a daughter." The words came slowly, painfully, like pulling arrows from flesh. "There was a winter, 5 years back, brutal cold and snow that buried the world. I went out to check the cattle, told my wife I would be back by nightfall, got caught in a blizzard, lost my way. Took me 2 days to get back." He paused, and Clara remained silent, giving him space to continue. "When I finally made it home, the cabin was frozen. The fire had gone out. They had run out of wood. My wife had tried to keep our daughter warm, wrapped her in every blanket we owned, but it was not enough. They were both gone. If I had been there, if I had stayed, if I had accepted my neighbor's offer to help me with the cattle that day instead of insisting I could handle it alone, they would have lived." The confession hung in the air between them, and Yates realized he was shaking. He had never spoken those words aloud, had carried the guilt and grief like stones in his pockets, weighing him down, pulling him under. Clara moved closer, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her presence. "That was not your fault. The weather, the cold, the terrible randomness of tragedy, none of that was something you could control or predict. I could have accepted help when it was offered. I was too proud, too certain I could do everything myself, and it cost me everything that mattered. So now you punish yourself by refusing all help, all connection, as if suffering alone will somehow balance the scales." Clara's voice was gentle but firm. "Yates, your wife and daughter would not want this for you. They would not want you to spend the rest of your life isolated and empty, wearing your loneliness like penance. You do not know what they would want. I know that love does not demand endless suffering. I know that the greatest honor you could give their memory is to live fully, to accept the grace and kindness that others offer, to allow yourself to be human again. Yates felt something crack open inside him, some frozen place that had been locked tight for 5 years, and to his horror, tears began sliding down his face. He tried to turn away, but Clara reached out and took his hand, her fingers warm and solid and real. "It is all right to grieve," she said. "It is all right to have survived when they did not. And it is all right to let someone care about you again." They stood there as night fell completely over Dodge City, and Yates held onto Clara's hand like it was the only thing keeping him tethered to the earth. The next morning, when Clara opened her store, she found a stack of firewood neatly piled by her back door and a note in careful handwriting that read simply, "Thank you for the kindness. I am trying." Over the weeks that followed, something shifted between them. Yates began accepting Clara's invitations for supper after the store closed. He helped her repair a broken shelf, then the front steps, then the storeroom door that stuck in its frame. She learned that he had a dry sense of humor hidden beneath the stoic exterior, that he loved horses with a gentleness that contrasted sharply with his rough appearance, and that he read poetry in the evenings when he thought no one was watching. Clara told him about growing up in Missouri, about her mother dying when she was young and her father raising her to be independent and capable. She confessed that she had rejected 3 marriage proposals because the men involved wanted a wife who would be decorative and obedient, and she had no intention of becoming either. "I want a partner," she said one evening as they sat on the porch behind her store, watching the stars emerge. "Someone who sees me as an equal, who respects my mind as much as my face, who understands that I am fully capable of running a business and making my own decisions." "Any man who could not see that would be a fool," Yates replied, and the look Clara gave him made his heart stutter in his chest. Their friendship deepened into something more complex, more charged, though neither of them spoke of it directly. Yates found himself thinking about Clara constantly, found excuses to visit the store, felt a rush of something warm and terrifying whenever she smiled at him. And Clara watched Yates slowly come back to life, watched the walls come down piece by piece, and felt herself falling for this wounded, stubborn, surprisingly tender man who was learning to accept kindness again. The turning point came in late summer when a group of drifters rode into Dodge City looking for trouble. They were loud and drunk and mean, the kind of men who measured their worth by how much fear they could inspire. Yates was walking Clara home after supper when 3 of them blocked their path, leering at Clara with obvious intent. "That is a pretty woman you have there," the largest one said, his words slurred. "Maybe she would like some better company." Yates stepped in front of Clara, his entire body coiled tight. "Walk away. Now or what? You going to stop all 3 of us, if I have to?" The tension ratcheted up, and Clara could see the violence brewing, could see Yates preparing to fight despite the odds because he could not, let anyone harm her. And in that moment, she understood the depth of his feelings, understood that this man who had sworn off connection and caring was ready to risk everything to keep her safe. But before fists could fly, the sheriff appeared with 2 deputies, drawn by the commotion, and the drifters backed down, moving away with muttered curses and backward glances. The sheriff escorted them out of town with a firm warning not to return, and Yates and Clara continued walking, the adrenaline still singing through their veins. "You would have fought them," Clara said when they reached her door. "All 3. Yes, you could have been seriously hurt, killed." Yes. She turned to face him, her amber eyes searching his face. Why? Yates reached out slowly, carefully, and cupped her face in his calloused hands. Because somewhere along the way, you became the most important thing in my world. Because the thought of anything happening to you makes me feel like I cannot breathe. Because you took this broken, closed-off man and insisted on caring about him, and you made me remember what it feels like to have something worth protecting. Yates, Clara whispered, her voice shaking. I am falling in love with you, Clara Zimmerman. I have been falling for weeks, and I am terrified because I do not know if I can survive losing someone again, but I am even more terrified of not taking this chance, of not telling you how I feel. Clara's answer was to rise up on her toes and kiss him, her lips soft and sure against his. And Yates wrapped his arms around her and kissed her back with 5 years of pent-up loneliness and longing. They stood there on her porch as the night deepened around them, holding each other like they were the answer to prayers neither had known how to speak. I love you too, Clara said when they finally broke apart. I think I have loved you since that first day when you were too stubborn to accept a simple meal. I saw something in you worth fighting for, and I have never been one to back down from a fight. Yates laughed, the sound rusty but genuine. I noticed. You are possibly the most determined woman I have ever met. Good. Because I am determined to make you happy, Yates Vance. I am determined to show you every single day that accepting love is not a betrayal of your past, but an honoring of your future. He kissed her again, slower this time, tender and full of promise. I believe you, and I promise I am going to try, really try to let you in completely, to accept help when it is offered, to build a life with you instead of just surviving alone. That is all I ask. They courted properly after that, or as properly as Dodge City allowed. Yates moved into the boarding house and actually used his room instead of the stable. He let Clara help him find better work at a nearby ranch that paid decent wages and treated their hands with respect. He attended church socials and town gatherings at her side, slowly becoming part of the community instead of a ghost passing through. Clara introduced him to her friends, and Yates discovered he actually enjoyed conversation when it was with people who genuinely wanted to know him. He started playing cards again, but for matchsticks instead of money, and found pleasure in the simple camaraderie. He helped build a new schoolhouse and participated in the barn raising when the Johnson family lost theirs to fire. And each act of community, of connection, felt like stitching himself back into the fabric of humanity. But there were still hard days, days when the guilt and grief rose up like a wave, threatening to pull him under. On those days, Clara would find him standing alone, staring at nothing, and she would simply take his hand and hold it until he could breathe again. Tell me about them, she said one afternoon when she found him like that, distant and haunted. Yates looked at her surprised. What? Your wife and daughter. Tell me about them. Their names, their personalities, the things that made them special. You carry them like a burden, but they were real people you loved. Honor them by remembering the joy, not just the loss. So Yates told her. About Sarah, his wife, who had laughed like music and could outride most men. About Emma, his daughter, who had been 4 years old and obsessed with collecting rocks, each one a treasure she would present to him with pride. He told Clara about Sunday mornings making flapjacks, about teaching Emma to count using buttons, about the way Sarah would hum while she worked, and how that sound had made their cabin feel like a home. The telling hurt, but it was a clean pain, like lancing a wound to let it heal properly. And Clara listened to every word, tears streaming down her face, holding Yates steady while he exorcised the ghosts that had haunted him for so long. They sound wonderful, Clara said when he finished, and I am honored that you trusted me enough to share them with me. They will always be part of your story, part of who you are, and I would never ask you to forget them. I worried that loving you meant betraying their memory, Yates admitted, but you helped me understand that the heart is not a finite resource, that I can hold space for both the past and the future. Exactly, and Yates, I think they would have liked knowing that you found your way back to happiness, that their loss, as terrible as it was, did not destroy you permanently. He pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. You saved me, Clara. You refused to let me disappear into isolation and grief. You insisted on caring even when I fought against it. You are the kindest, most stubborn, most extraordinary woman I have ever known, and I want to spend the rest of my life with you. Clara pulled back to look at him, her eyes wide. Yates Vance, are you proposing to me? I am. Though I admit I had planned to do it with a ring and some semblance of romance, not standing in your storeroom surrounded by flour sacks. She laughed, the sound bright and clear. I do not care about rings or romance. I care about you, about us, about building a life together. So yes, absolutely yes, I will marry you. They married in the fall of 1878 in the small church at the edge of Dodge City with half the town in attendance. Clara wore a dress of deep blue that brought out her eyes, and Yates wore a new suit that he allowed Clara to help him purchase, though he grumbled about the expense. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Yates kissed his bride with such tenderness that several women in the congregation wiped tears from their eyes. They moved into the rooms above Clara's store, making the space theirs with careful attention. Yates built new furniture, accepting help from neighbors when the pieces proved too large for one person. Clara sewed curtains and painted walls, and Yates learned to ask for her opinion instead of assuming he knew best. They established a rhythm, a partnership built on mutual respect and genuine affection. The first time Yates got sick with a bad fever, he initially tried to hide it, old habits dying hard. But Clara saw through his stoic facade immediately and insisted he stay in bed while she nursed him back to health. Yates wanted to protest, wanted to insist he was fine, but the words died in his throat because Clara's care came from a place of love, not pity, and he was finally learning to recognize the difference. This feels wrong, he admitted as she brought him broth and cool cloths for his forehead. I should be taking care of myself. Marriage is about taking care of each other, Clara replied firmly. When I am sick, you will do the same for me. That is how partnership works. You do not have to be invincible, Yates. You just have to be honest. He took her hand and kissed her palm. I am still learning, but I promise I am trying. I know you are, and I love you for it. Their first year of marriage was not without challenges. They argued occasionally, usually when Yates retreated into old patterns of isolation or when Clara pushed too hard for connection. But they learned to navigate disagreements with honesty and respect, to apologize when they hurt each other, to choose partnership over pride. Yates took on more responsibility at the ranch where he worked, eventually becoming the foreman because the owner recognized his skill with horses and his fair treatment of the other hands. The position came with better pay and a small house on the property, and after discussing it thoroughly, Yates and Clara decided to move. They would keep the store, hiring someone to manage it during the day, but the house represented a new chapter, a life they were building together from the ground up. The house needed work, and this time when neighbors offered to help, Yates accepted with genuine gratitude. He was learning that community was not a burden but a blessing, that allowing others to contribute to his life did not diminish him, but enriched everyone involved. Clara worked alongside him, painting and cleaning and making the space a home, and Yates marveled at how different this felt from his cabin in Montana Territory. how the ghosts of his past had finally released their grip. On their first anniversary, Yates took Clara on a picnic to a spot overlooking the Arkansas River, spreading a blanket under a cottonwood tree and presenting her with a carefully wrapped package. Inside was a leather-bound journal filled with blank pages. "I want you to write our story," he said. "Everything that has happened, everything still to come. You gave me back my life, Clara. You insisted on seeing something worth saving when I had given up on myself. I want that documented, preserved, so we never forget what it took to get here." Clara held the journal to her chest, tears streaming down her face. "This is the most thoughtful gift anyone has ever given me. You deserve thoughtful. You deserve everything good this world has to offer." She set the journal aside and moved into his lap, wrapping her arms around his neck. "I already have everything I need right here." They made love under the cottonwood tree, the Kansas prairie stretching out around them in all directions, and Yates felt a peace so profound it was almost painful. This was happiness, he realized. This was what life looked like when you stopped running from it, when you let yourself be vulnerable and open and connected. This was what he had been denying himself for 5 years, and the waste of it, the unnecessary suffering, made him hold Clara even tighter. "I love you," he whispered against her hair. "Thank you for not giving up on me." "Never," Clara promised. "Not then, not now, not ever." The following spring, Clara discovered she was pregnant, and Yates experienced a terror so complete he could barely function. The memories of Emma, of losing his daughter, came flooding back with devastating intensity, and he found himself paralyzed by fear of history repeating itself. Clara found him in the barn one evening, sitting in the shadows, and she lowered herself carefully beside him, her hand resting on her barely visible belly. "Talk to me," she said quietly. "I cannot lose you," Yates choked out. "I cannot lose another child. I will not survive it, Clara. I will not. You are not going to lose me, and you are not going to lose this baby. We have a good doctor, we have help. We have everything we need to ensure this pregnancy goes well." Sarah had everything she needed too. It did not matter. Clara took his face in her hands, forcing him to look at her. "I am not Sarah. This is not Montana territory. You are not alone this time, Yates. We have a whole community ready to help us. You have learned to accept that help, to trust that others will be there when we need them. This is different. Everything about this is different." "I am terrified," he admitted. "So am I. Bringing a life into this world is terrifying. But we are going to do it together, and we are going to ask for help when we need it, and we are going to trust that the universe is not simply waiting to punish us for being happy." Yates pulled her close as he could with her belly between them, and let himself cry. Clara held him through it, steady and strong, and when the storm of emotion finally passed, he felt lighter, clearer. "All right," he said. "All right. We do this together. We accept help. We trust the process. We do." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and true to their promise, Yates and Clara accepted help from everyone who offered. The women from church organized to bring meals. The neighbors checked in regularly. The doctor visited frequently, monitoring Clara's health and answering Yates's worried questions with patience. Yates had to fight his instinct to control everything, to prepare for every possible disaster, to keep everyone at arm's length. But each time he felt the fear rising, he would remember Clara's words. "This is different. Everything about this is different." And he would breathe and accept the casserole someone brought, and allow himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, things could work out. Clara went into labor on a warm June morning in 1880, and Yates stayed by her side through all of it, holding her hand and helping her breathe and accepting his own helplessness in the face of her pain. The midwife they had hired, an experienced woman named Mrs. Patterson, worked calmly and efficiently, and when the baby finally arrived healthy and screaming, Yates felt his knees go weak. "You have a son," Mrs. Patterson announced, placing the squirming bundle on Clara's chest. "A son." Yates looked down at the tiny red face, the flailing fists, the absolute perfection of this new life, and felt something fundamental shift inside him. This was not a replacement for Emma. This was not an attempt to recreate the past. This was something entirely new, entirely its own, and he was being given a second chance to be a father. "Hello, little one," Clara whispered, exhausted and radiant. "Welcome to the world." She looked up at Yates, her amber eyes shining. "Do you want to hold your son?" Yates hesitated, old fears clawing at him, but then he reached out and carefully gathered the baby into his arms. The weight was so slight, so fragile, and the responsibility of it was overwhelming. But as he looked down at his son's face, at the tiny features that were already somehow familiar, he felt love crash over him like a wave. "I am going to do better this time," he promised quietly. "I am going to accept help. I am going to let people in. I am going to be the father you deserve." Clara smiled, tears streaming down her face. "You already are." They named him James after Clara's father, and young Jamie became the center of their world. Yates threw himself into fatherhood with the same intensity he had once applied to isolation, but this time he did not try to do everything alone. He accepted advice from other fathers. He let Mrs. Patterson teach him how to properly swaddle the baby. He asked for help when he was overwhelmed and admitted when he did not know what to do. The first night Jamie was ill with colic, screaming inconsolably. Yates felt the panic rising, the memories of helplessness and loss threatening to drown him. But instead of shutting down, instead of trying to handle it alone, he woke Clara and together they walked the floor, taking turns holding Jamie, supporting each other through the difficult hours. And when morning came and Jamie finally settled, Yates understood in a new way what partnership truly meant. As Jamie grew from infant to toddler, Yates documented every milestone with the wonder of a man who had thought he would never experience these moments again. First smile, first tooth, first steps, all of it felt miraculous. And he made sure to share these moments, to invite neighbors over to meet Jamie, to allow the community to be part of their son's life. Clara watched her husband bloom into the father she had known he could be, watched him learn to balance protection with freedom, to allow Jamie to explore and make mistakes and become his own person. And she fell even more deeply in love with this man who had learned to accept kindness, who had learned to be vulnerable, who had learned that strength was not about doing everything alone, but about knowing when to ask for help. When Jamie was 2 years old, Clara became pregnant again, and this time, though Yates still felt the flutter of anxiety, it was manageable. He knew what to expect. He trusted the process. And when their daughter was born in the spring of 1883, healthy and perfect, Yates held her and wept with gratitude. They named her Sarah, honoring Yates's first wife, because Clara insisted that love was not diminished by remembrance but enriched by it. And as Yates cradled his daughter, telling her about the woman she was named after, he felt a sense of peace so complete, it took his breath away. The past and present existed together without conflict, and he could honor both without betraying either. Life settled into a rhythm of joy and challenge, of ordinary days made extraordinary by love and connection. Yates continued working at the ranch, eventually buying a partnership in the operation because the owner had no children and recognized Yates's dedication and skill. Clara managed the store remotely while raising their children, eventually training Jamie to help with inventory as he got older. They hosted dinners and attended gatherings and became pillars of the Dodge City community. Yates served on the town council and helped mediate disputes, his own journey from isolation to connection giving him unique insight into helping others find their way. Clara organized charity drives and taught Sunday school and mentored young women starting their own businesses. On their 10th anniversary, as they sat on the porch watching Jamie chase Sarah through the yard, Clara leaned against Yates's shoulder and sighed contentedly. "You remember that first day?" she asked. "When I tried to give you cornbread and you looked at me like I was offering you poison." Yates laughed, the sound easy and warm. "I was an idiot, a stubborn, broken idiot who thought suffering alone was somehow noble. You were hurt. There is a difference. You saved me anyway. You refused to let me disappear into my pain. You insisted on caring even when I fought against it every step of the way." Clara turned to look at him, her amber eyes soft. "You saved yourself, Yates. I just reminded you that you were worth saving. Everything else, all the hard work of healing and growing and learning to trust again, that was you." "We did it together," he corrected. "That is what you taught me. That life is meant to be shared, that accepting help is not weakness, that love multiplies instead of divides." "You gave me back my humanity, Clara. You gave me a family and a home and a future I had thought was lost forever. And you gave me a partnership built on equality and respect. You never tried to diminish me or control me. You saw me as I was and loved me for it. That is a rare gift, Yates Vance." He kissed her temple, watching their children play in the golden light of the setting sun. Jamie was 7 now, already showing signs of his father's quiet strength and his mother's determination. Sarah was 4, bright and curious and fearless, and she had indeed inherited her namesake's spirit. "I want to take you back to Montana," Yates said suddenly. "I want to visit their graves, to introduce them properly to you and the children, to show them that their loss, as terrible as it was, did not destroy me. That I found my way back to life and love, and that they are still honored and remembered." Clara squeezed his hand. "I think that would be beautiful and healing. When do you want to go? This summer? We can make a trip of it, show the children the mountains, visit the ranch where I grew up. Then we will, together as a family." They made the journey in July, traveling by train and then wagon to the small cemetery where Sarah and Emma were buried. The graves were simple, marked by wooden crosses that had weathered over the years, and Yates spent a long time just standing there, Clara at his side, the children playing quietly nearby. "I am sorry I stayed away so long," he said quietly. "I was ashamed of surviving, ashamed of being happy again. But Clara taught me that you would not have wanted that the greatest way to honor you is to live fully, to love completely, to accept the gifts that life offers." He knelt down, placing fresh flowers on each grave. "I want you to meet my family. My wife, Clara, who saved me when I had given up on myself. My son, Jamie, who is brave and kind and everything I could hope for. And my daughter, Sarah, who carries your name and your spirit." Clara placed her hand on his shoulder, and Jamie and little Sarah came to stand beside him, all of them together in that quiet place. "Thank you for the time we had," Yates continued. "Thank you for teaching me what love was, and thank you for releasing me to find it again. I will never forget you, but I am no longer haunted by you, and I think that is what you would have wanted." They stayed for an hour, Yates telling his children stories about their half-sister they would never meet, about the woman who came before their mother. And Clara listened, holding space for all the complicated emotions, understanding that healing was not linear but layered. As they left the cemetery, Yates felt lighter than he had in over a decade. The guilt had finally released its grip, and he could move forward without the weight of the past dragging him down. They returned to Dodge City in late summer, and life continued its forward momentum. Jamie grew into a thoughtful young man who wanted to be a teacher. Sarah became fascinated with horses, following her father around the ranch and learning everything he could teach her. Clara's store thrived, eventually expanding to include a small cafe, and Yates's partnership at the ranch proved so successful they were able to purchase additional land. More importantly, their home remained a place of warmth and welcome, where neighbors knew they could find help and friends could count on support. Yates had learned the lesson Clara taught him all those years ago, that community, connection, and accepting kindness were not weaknesses but strengths, not burdens but blessings. On quiet evenings, Yates would sit on the porch with Clara, watching the Kansas sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and crimson, and he would marvel at the journey that had brought him from that isolated, grief-stricken man to this life of abundance and love. "What are you thinking?" Clara would ask, though she probably knew. "That I am grateful," Yates would reply. "That I almost missed all of this because I was too stubborn and hurt to accept help. That you refused to let me waste my life, and that makes you the most remarkable woman I have ever known. I just saw what was there beneath all the pain and walls. I knew you were worth the effort. I love you, Clara Vance, today and every day for the rest of my life. And I love you, you stubborn, wonderful man. Thank you for letting me in. Thank you for learning to accept kindness again." They would sit there as darkness fell, hands clasped together, surrounded by the life they had built through patience and trust, and the kind of love that transforms. And Yates would think about that distant cowboy he had been, the man who refused all help, who carried his pain like armor, who believed isolation was safety. That man was gone, replaced by someone stronger and braver and infinitely more alive. Someone who understood that true courage was not facing everything alone, but having the humility to accept help when it was offered. Someone who had learned that love, real love, demanded vulnerability and trust, and the willingness to let someone else see you at your weakest. Clara had taught him all of that and more, and every day with her was a gift he never took for granted. Their story continued through the years, through challenges and triumphs, through ordinary moments made extraordinary by the presence of love. And when they were old, surrounded by grandchildren and great-grandchildren, Yates and Clara would still sit on that porch at sunset, still holding hands, still grateful for that day in 1878 when a stubborn woman refused to let a broken man suffer alone. "You know what the best part is?" Yates said one evening, his hair white and his face lined with years, but his eyes still the same steel gray that had first caught Clara's attention. "What is that?" I almost said no. I almost walked away that first time you offered me food. I almost let pride and pain rob me of everything that came after. And then I think about all I would have missed, all the love and joy and life, and it terrifies me how close I came to losing it all. Clara leaned her head on his shoulder, her own hair silver, her amber eyes still sharp and bright. "But you did not say no. You took a chance. You let me in, and look what we built together. The best life I could have imagined, better than I deserved. No, exactly what you deserved, exactly what we both deserved. A love built on honesty and respect and the willingness to be vulnerable with each other. That is not luck, Yates. That is choice. Every single day we chose each other, chose to show up, chose to do the work. That is why it lasted." Yates kissed the top of her head, breathing in the familiar scent of her, feeling the solid warmth of her presence. "I would choose you 1,000 times over. In every life, in every circumstance, I would always choose you. And I would always choose you. My distant cowboy who learned to let someone in. My stubborn man who learned to accept kindness. My greatest love." They sat there as the stars emerged, scattered across the vast Kansas sky like diamonds, and Yates felt a peace so profound it brought tears to his eyes. This was what happiness looked like. This was what healing felt like. This was the life you could build when you stopped running from connection and started embracing it. And it had all started with a simple offer of cornbread and the insistence of a woman who refused to let him suffer alone. Everything good in his life had flowed from that moment, from Clara's determination to show him that accepting kindness was not a weakness but a gift, that vulnerability was strength, that love was always worth the risk. As they finally rose to go inside, Yates took one last look at the plain stretching out in all directions, at the home they had built, at the life they had created through patience and trust and unwavering commitment to each other. And he sent up a silent prayer of gratitude for second chances, for stubborn women who saw past the walls, and for the courage to accept help when it was offered. The distant cowboy had learned to let people in, and in doing so, he had found everything worth living for. Love, family, community, connection, all the things he had thought were lost forever. And every day for the rest of his life, Yates Vance would wake up grateful for the lesson Clara had taught him, that accepting kindness was not a surrender but a homecoming, and that the bravest thing anyone could do was allow themselves to be loved. Their story ended not with grand gestures or dramatic moments, but with the quiet satisfaction of a life well lived, a love well earned, and the knowledge that they had been exactly what each other needed at exactly the right time. And in the years after they passed, their descendants would tell the story of how a grieving cowboy found his way back to life through the insistence of a store owner who refused to let him disappear into his pain. It became a family legend, a reminder that sometimes the greatest act of courage is simply allowing someone to care, and that accepting help is not a sign of weakness, but a celebration of our shared humanity.